You're getting interrupted in meetings by the same person who never interrupts anyone else. You've stated boundaries that get violated by people who somehow respect everyone else's limits. You watch someone half as competent command twice the respect in rooms where you're objectively more qualified. The question eating at you is simple. Why do some people's words carry weight while yours get dismissed? Why do certain individuals set a boundary once and everyone adjusts while you've set the same boundary 5 times and people still test it? Here's what makes this particularly frustrating. You're doing everything the conventional advice tells you. You're being competent at your work. You're communicating clearly about your needs. You're trying to be assertive without being aggressive. Yet the treatment you receive stays fundamentally the same. People still assume your time is less valuable. They still treat your priorities as negotiable. They still approach you differently than they approach others who seem to command natural respect. There's a reason this keeps happening, and it has nothing to do with your competence or communication skills. The gap between how you're being treated and how you want to be treated comes down to one thing you haven't done yet. One decisive action that would permanently reset how everyone in your life calculates your position in their world. This isn't about changing who you are. This is about demonstrating something you already possess in a way that others can actually see and measure. One moment where you prove through action, rather than words, that certain standards are real. That single demonstration creates what people now call the Machiavelli aura, that quality of silent power where your boundaries precede you and tests become rare because people have learned what you will and won't accept. The person who figured this out lived 500 years ago. Florence, 1513. Niccolò Machiavelli sits in exile watching the same pattern repeat across Italian courts. Talented people dying poor and forgotten. Mediocre individuals commanding kingdoms. He documented exactly what separated those who wielded power from those who merely occupied positions. What he discovered about power dynamics applies more directly to your current situation than anything in modern self-improvement literature. Machiavelli observed that people don't measure you by your daily consistency or your good intentions. They measure you by what you demonstrate in one critical moment under pressure. Your capacity for what he called virtù, effective action that others can witness. The moment you show through decisive enforcement that you operate from necessita, from strategic principle, rather than emotional impulse, everyone's mental model of you shifts. The tests stop. The respect appears. The treatment changes permanently. This is understanding reality as it exists, rather than as you wish it were. What follows is exactly how to identify that moment, execute that action, and maintain the transformation it creates. Most people think Machiavelli taught ruthless manipulation. They believe he said the ends justify the means, that he advocated lying and backstabbing your way to power. These people have never actually read The Prince. They've absorbed a caricature that has almost nothing to do with what the man actually wrote. What Machiavelli actually taught was strategic clarity about how the world functions. He observed that effective action, what he termed virtù, matters more than moral posturing. He noticed that understanding circumstances, what he called fortuna, allows you to build defenses before crisis arrives. He documented how reputation operates independently from reality, how others judge what they see you do, rather than what you intend to do. The courts of Renaissance Italy gave him a laboratory. He watched skilled diplomats who maintained perfect etiquette yet accomplished nothing. He watched crude military commanders who violated every social nicety yet secured their cities. He documented exactly what separated those who wielded power from those who merely occupied positions. Here's the pattern he identified. When you demonstrate through decisive action that you understand necessita, that you act from strategic principle rather than emotional reaction, Everyone around you recalculates. They adjust their approach to you. They test your boundaries less frequently. They respect your time more carefully. This happens through one visible moment that proves you mean what you say. Think about your own experience. You've worked with people who are constantly interrupted in meetings. You've watched certain individuals whose emails get ignored, while others receive immediate responses. You've seen someone establish a boundary and have it immediately violated while another person sets the exact same boundary, and everyone complies without question. The difference comes from demonstrated capacity. Machiavelli noticed that courts were full of intelligent people making intelligent arguments that went nowhere. Meanwhile, less articulate individuals who had proven through action that they would enforce consequences got what they requested. And this is dark philosophy only if you prefer comforting lies to uncomfortable truths. In chapter 15 of The Prince Machiavelli, writes something that makes people uncomfortable. He says, "We live so far from how we ought to live that anyone who abandons what is done for what ought to be done learns to bring about his own ruin rather than his preservation." Break that down. You want people to respect your time, so you should just be good at your job, and people will naturally notice. You want people to take you seriously, so you should just be competent and wait for recognition. You want relationships where your boundaries are honored, so you should just communicate clearly, and reasonable people will understand. Machiavelli would call this thinking dangerously naive. People respond to what they experience from you specifically, what they experience in moments of pressure or conflict. Your regular competence becomes background noise. Your clear communication means nothing until they test whether you'll actually enforce what you've communicated. Here's the formula Machiavelli identified. Your reputation equals their memory of your last decisive action. The last time they saw you enforce a boundary or fail to enforce one. The last time they watched you accept disrespect or shut it down. The last time you demonstrated strength under pressure or folded to avoid discomfort. This creates what people now describe as silent power. You're not constantly asserting yourself or making speeches about respect. You simply proved through one memorable action that certain lines are real, and now those lines are assumed. The high-value man or woman operates from this foundation. They've demonstrated their standards clearly enough that most people never think to violate them. Machiavelli introduces one of his most famous metaphors in chapter 18. He says, "You must know there are two methods of fighting, one by law and the other by force. The first is proper to humans, the second to beasts. Because the first is often insufficient, you must have recourse to the second. Therefore, you need to know how to use both the beast and the person." Then he gets specific. You need to be both lion and fox. The lion has strength that frightens wolves. The fox has cunning that recognizes traps. Without the fox, you can't see traps coming. Without the lion, you can't defend yourself from those who mean harm. Most people split themselves into one category. They operate purely as fox, clever and strategic, but ultimately unable to enforce anything. When challenged, they maneuver and negotiate, and try to outsmart the situation, which often works until it suddenly doesn't. The other category is pure lion strong and willing to fight, but walking straight into obvious traps because they never developed strategic intelligence. Machiavelli insists you need both qualities visible in your actions. Here's why this matters for power dynamics. People are constantly probing to determine which category you occupy. When they test a boundary, they're asking whether you're a lion or just making lion sounds. When they create a political trap, they're checking whether you have the fox's ability to see it coming. The sophisticated application of Machiavelli philosophy involves demonstrating both capacities in one decisive moment. You see the trap showing fox intelligence. You respond with unmistakable enforcement, showing lion strength. This combination is what creates the emotional control that others perceive as unshakable. Think about the last time someone tested a boundary you'd stated. Maybe they asked for something you'd already declined. Maybe they interrupted you after you'd requested they let you finish. Maybe they showed up late to something where you'd emphasized punctuality mattered. Your response in that moment taught them everything about which animal you are. The fox response alone involves clever maneuvering. You find an excuse for why you can't help this time, hoping they'll get the hint. You pause awkwardly when interrupted, hoping they'll notice and stop. You make a passive comment about the time, hoping they'll feel guilty. These responses demonstrate intelligence without enforcement, and the person learns you're manageable. The lion response alone involves immediate confrontation. You get angry, you make the violation into a conflict, you escalate the emotional temperature. This can work short-term, yet it often damages relationships and makes you look reactive rather than strategic. People learn you're strong, yet possibly unstable. The combined response is what Machiavelli recommended. You calmly note the pattern, demonstrating you've been tracking it like a fox. You implement an immediate clear consequence, demonstrating lion enforcement. You do this without anger or lengthy explanation, showing emotional control that suggests this is simply how you operate. This is the action that changes how people treat you. Machiavelli understood something most people miss. Your reputation is not built through your consistent daily behavior. Your reputation crystallizes around the moments where you demonstrated capacity under pressure. Think about how you remember people. You don't catalog their average Tuesday. You remember the meeting where they stood firm against a demanding client. You recall the moment they called out inappropriate behavior everyone else ignored. You remember when they said no to a request from someone powerful and actually maintained that no. These moments create what we now call the Machiavelli aura. It's the sense that someone operates from a different calibration than most people. They have standards that aren't negotiable. They enforce boundaries without visible emotion. They respond to pressure by becoming more clear and decisive, rather than more accommodating and uncertain. Here's what this looks like in practice. Consider someone in your professional network who commands respect naturally. I'm talking about the person whose calendar requests get accepted, whose emails receive prompt responses, whose suggestions in meetings get implemented. Track back through your experience with them. There was probably a specific moment where you or others witnessed them enforcing a boundary clearly. Maybe they declined a high-profile project because it conflicted with their stated priorities. Maybe they addressed someone's habitual lateness directly, rather than working around it. Maybe they held a difficult conversation that everyone else was avoiding. That single action taught you something about their capacity, and you adjusted your approach to them accordingly. Contrast this with someone in your network who is equally competent, perhaps more talented, yet somehow commands less respect. Their boundaries get tested constantly. People cancel on them casually. Their time is treated as less valuable than others' time. If you observe carefully, you'll notice they've never had that defining moment where they demonstrated enforcement. They've communicated boundaries through hints and hopes rather than through action. The Sigma male archetype that's become popular recently is essentially someone who has internalized this Machiavellian principle. They don't seek approval or explain themselves excessively. They demonstrate through selective decisive action that certain standards are non-negotiable, then they proceed with their priorities while others adjust around them. Machiavelli observed that perception operates on a specific formula. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. This isn't about deception. This is about understanding that most people interact with the version of you they've constructed in their minds based on limited data points. They construct that version primarily from your response to tests and challenges. You might be deeply principled, yet if you've never visibly enforced those principles under pressure, people don't know that about you. You might have strong boundaries, yet if you've consistently bent them to avoid conflict, people assume your boundaries are suggestions rather than requirements. Here's where this becomes practical. You can actually calculate how people will treat you based on their last significant experience of you under pressure. Did you maintain your position when challenged? Did you follow through on stated consequences? Did you stay calm and clear when someone tried to make you emotional? Their answers to these questions determine how they approach you going forward. This explains why command respect is something you demonstrate rather than request. Asking people to respect you communicates that you're unsure whether they should. Demonstrating through action that disrespect has immediate consequences communicates that respect is simply the operating assumption. The challenge most people face is they've spent years training others to treat them a certain way. Every time you accepted disrespect without consequence, you taught people that disrespect works with you. Every time you stated a boundary but didn't enforce it, you taught people your boundaries are negotiable. Every time you reacted emotionally to provocation, you taught people they can manipulate you by triggering emotion. Machiavelli would say you've been acting as if the world should operate according to fairness and good intentions. Meanwhile, the world has been operating according to demonstrated patterns and effective action. The gap between these two frameworks is where your frustration lives. Here's a subtlety in Machiavelli philosophy that matters significantly. Machiavelli distinguished between what must be done publicly and what can be handled privately. Some boundaries need public enforcement because public violation requires public correction. Other boundaries can be maintained through private conversation without making a show of it. The strategic question becomes which situations require visible demonstration and which situations benefit from discretion. Machiavelli gave guidance on this through examples. When Cesare Borgia needed to establish order in Romagna, he appointed a brutal lieutenant who stabilized the region. Then he had that lieutenant executed publicly. This single action demonstrated both that disorder would be crushed and that Borgia himself maintained standards even his own enforcers had to meet. The modern application is simpler, yet follows the same logic. When someone violates a boundary in front of others, addressing it publicly teaches everyone in the room about your standards. When someone violates a boundary privately, you have the option to address it privately, unless it's part of a pattern that others should witness you handling. This is where emotional control becomes crucial. Public enforcement requires you to remain calm and clear while making the boundary visible. Getting angry or emotional during public enforcement makes it about the feeling rather than the principle. Staying measured while being firm makes it about the standard you're maintaining. If this resonates with your experience, if you recognize these patterns in your own relationships and career, stay with this. What comes next is the exact mechanism for changing how people treat you. Machiavelli uses a term that doesn't translate perfectly into English. Necessita means acting from necessity, from strategic requirement, rather than emotional impulse. When your action is clearly visibly necessary, given your principles or position, it carries different weight than action from anger, ego, or reactive feeling. Here's why this matters. When people see you enforce a boundary out of anger, they learn you're emotional and potentially manipulable through triggering that emotion. When people see you enforce a boundary from what appears to be principle-based necessity, they learn you operate from a framework larger than the immediate situation. This is the foundation of self-improvement that actually changes power dynamics. You're developing the capacity to act from principle, even when emotionally activated. You're building the skill to identify which actions are truly necessary for maintaining your standards versus which actions are simply emotional responses to feeling disrespected. Think about a recent situation where someone violated a boundary. Maybe they asked you to cover their work again after you'd said you couldn't continue doing that. Maybe they interrupted you in a meeting after you'd requested they let you finish points. Maybe they showed up significantly late to something after you'd emphasized timing mattered. Your immediate emotional reaction probably involved frustration or irritation. That's natural. The question Machiavelli would ask is what action was necessary given your stated principles. If you've said you won't regularly cover others' work, then saying no again is necessita. If you've requested not to be interrupted, then stopping mid-sentence and waiting is necessita. If you've said punctuality matters for something, then addressing the lateness is necessita. The power comes from executing that necessary action without the emotional charge. You're simply maintaining a standard you've already stated. This creates the perception of silent power because you're clearly operating from something deeper than momentary feeling. Machiavelli identified specific characteristics that make an action effective in changing how others treat you. He drew these from observing which actions actually shifted power dynamics versus which actions just created drama without lasting impact. First, the action must be visible. Private boundaries that nobody witnesses don't change public perception. You might maintain perfect standards in one-on-one interactions, yet if those moments are never seen by others, they don't contribute to your reputation. This doesn't mean you perform for an audience. This means when a boundary violation happens in a context where others can observe your response, that becomes a teaching moment about who you are. Second, the action must be unambiguous. Half measures or unclear responses leave room for people to interpret your intent differently. When you say, "I'd prefer if you didn't interrupt, but go ahead," you've communicated that interruption is actually acceptable. When you stop speaking mid-sentence and wait in silence until the interrupter finishes, you've communicated that interruption is not acceptable. The clarity removes ambiguity about where you stand. Third, the action must be proportional. Overreaction makes you look emotional and unstable. Underreaction makes you look weak or uncertain. The right proportion shows you've measured the situation accurately and responded with exactly what it required. Machiavelli emphasized this because disproportionate responses, whether too harsh or too soft, undermine your credibility. Fourth, the action must be final rather than provisional. You're implementing a consequence or maintaining a boundary period. You're avoiding the language of "if you do this again" or "I really mean it this time." That language communicates your previous statements weren't real. The finality communicates this is simply how things are. Fifth, the action must clearly serve principle rather than impulse. You've stated what you value or require, and now you're maintaining that standard. This connection between stated principle and current action is what creates the perception that you're someone who means what you say. Others learn that your words predict your actions reliably. Let me walk you through 3 specific scenarios where one decisive action following these principles changes everything about how people treat you. Scenario 1 involves a boundary violation. Someone has crossed a line you've communicated, whether implicitly or explicitly. This happened before, and you responded softly, hoping they'd adjust. Now it's happened again, and others are watching how you handle it. The weak response sounds like this. "Hey, I know you probably didn't mean to, and maybe I wasn't clear before, but could you try not to do that thing? I'd really appreciate it." This response apologizes for having a boundary, makes excuses for the violator, and phrases enforcement as a request rather than a requirement. The person learns your boundaries are negotiable, and you're uncomfortable enforcing them. The Machiavelli philosophy response sounds completely different. You state the boundary clearly, name the violation directly, and implement an immediate consequence without apology or anger. For example, "That's the second time you've interrupted me in this meeting. I'll wait until you're finished. Then you actually stop speaking and wait however uncomfortable the silence becomes. This response demonstrates several things simultaneously. You track patterns like a fox, showing strategic awareness. You enforce like a lion, showing you'll actually implement consequences. You maintain emotional control, showing this is principle rather than impulse. The person learns your boundaries are real, and others in the room note how you handle boundary violations. Scenario 2 involves an unreasonable request. Someone asks you to do something that violates your stated priorities or values. They expect compliance based on your history of saying yes when you meant no. This is your opportunity to demonstrate that your yes actually means something, because your no is real. The weak response involves over-explaining. I'm really swamped right now, and I've got this other thing, and normally I would. But I just don't think I can make it work this time, maybe next week, though. This response suggests your no is temporary and negotiable, that enough pressure might change it to yes that you're uncomfortable with the decision. The high-value man or woman response is direct. No, I'm committed to finishing the Harrison project this week. I won't be able to help with that. Period. No excessive justification, no false hope about future availability, no apology for having priorities. The person learns that when you commit to something, you protect that commitment, which means your future commitments to them will also be protected. Scenario 3 involves a character test. You're in a situation where there's pressure to compromise a stated value for approval advancement or ease. Maybe everyone else is doing it. Maybe it would make your life simpler. The choice you make here, visible to others, defines whether your stated principles are real or decorative. The weak response involves rationalization. You've said you value direct communication, yet someone asks you to deliver difficult feedback through a third party to avoid discomfort. You agree because it's easier rationalizing that it's just this once or the circumstances are unique. Anyone watching learns your principles bend under pressure. The Machiavelli aura response involves alignment between principle and action. I understand that's easier, yet I've committed to direct communication in my role. I'll speak with them directly tomorrow. You accept the cost of your values, which is what makes them credible. Others note that you actually are who you say you are, which is rare enough that it becomes your defining characteristic. Machiavelli gave specific guidance on execution that still applies. Before the action, you need certainty about necessity. Ask yourself whether this boundary truly matters to your principles. Have you stated this standard before, either explicitly or through your behavior? Are you prepared for the consequences of enforcement, including the possibility that some people will choose not to adjust? If you're uncertain whether the boundary matters, don't enforce it dramatically. Save decisive action for standards you're absolutely committed to maintaining. This selectivity is what makes your decisive actions credible when you do take them. Next, choose the moment strategically. The action should be public enough to be noticed yet appropriate to the context. You're looking for clear enough that it can't be misunderstood timed, so you're not in the heat of emotional reaction. If you need to wait until you're calm, wait. Emotional control during enforcement is what separates principle from impulse. Prepare mentally for the response. Machiavelli observed that people test harder immediately after you start enforcing a boundary they're used to violating. This is predictable. They're checking whether the change is real or temporary. Some people will leave the relationship entirely rather than adjust. Let them. Others will recalibrate and actually become stronger allies once they understand your real standards. During the action itself, maintain calm clarity. Your voice stays level, showing this isn't emotional. Your statement is brief, showing you're not negotiating or seeking approval. You implement the consequence or maintain the boundary, then you stop talking. Let the silence do work. Don't rescue the discomfort that naturally follows clear boundary enforcement. Specifically, avoid these common mistakes. Don't apologize for having standards. Don't over-explain your reasoning. Don't seek reassurance that you're being reasonable. Don't soften the message with qualifiers like kind of or sort of. Each of these moves undermines the clarity of what you're demonstrating. After the action follow-through becomes everything. If you stated a consequence, implement it. Don't issue warnings after you've already warned. Machiavelli wrote that you should either treat people well or crush them, because they can avenge lighter injuries while more serious ones leave them unable to retaliate. The modern translation is that half measures invite continued testing, while clear enforcement ends the question. Equally important, don't revisit the decision. Don't apologize later for maintaining your boundary. Don't explain further or seek validation that you handled it correctly. The action speaks, and continuing to talk about it dilutes its impact. Resume normal interaction, allowing your enforcement to become simply a known fact about how you operate. Machiavelli documented 3 types of responses to displays of virtue, and you'll see all 3 after you take decisive action. Understanding these patterns helps you navigate the aftermath without second-guessing yourself. 15 to 20% of people are immediate adapters. These are individuals who are actually testing to see whether you'd enforce what you claimed. Once you prove enforcement is real, they recalibrate quickly and often become allies. They respect demonstrated strength when they see it. Machiavelli wrote that there are people so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that one who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. The darker reading is that people wait to see what you'll actually do before deciding how to treat you. The immediate adapters were waiting for proof. Once provided, they accept it and adjust their behavior permanently. Your response to immediate adapters should be straightforward. Acknowledge their adjustment, if appropriate, proceed with the new dynamic, and don't gloat or reference the previous pattern. They've adapted, which is what you wanted. Making them feel small about it would be counterproductive. 10 to 15% of people are resistors. These individuals benefited from your previous weakness or flexibility. Your strength disrupts their system. They'll increase pressure before accepting the change, and some will choose to leave the relationship entirely, rather than adjust to your boundaries. Machiavelli called these people enemies of the new order. In Chapter 6 of The Prince, he wrote that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. He understood that change threatens those who profited from the previous arrangement. Your response to resistors requires emotional control and consistency. Expect escalation, meaning they'll test harder after your initial enforcement. This is their way of checking whether your change is permanent or temporary. Maintain the exact same boundary without escalating emotionally yourself. Some will eventually adapt. Others will drift away. Both outcomes are acceptable because maintaining your standards matters more than maintaining relationships built on you abandoning those standards. The remaining 65 to 75% are the observant majority. They're watching to see whether your enforcement was one time or represents a pattern. They won't test immediately because they're risk-averse. Instead, they'll slowly adjust their behavior over weeks and months as they see you maintain consistency. This group cares about one thing, whether you're reliable in your new standard. If you enforce the boundary this week but abandon it next week, they learn the change was temporary. If you maintain the same standard across different situations and different people, they learn this is genuinely who you are now. Their gradual recalibration is what shifts your overall reputation. Your response to the observant majority is patient consistency. You're not performing for them or trying to convince them. You're simply maintaining your standards while they observe. Over time, their adjusted behavior becomes the new normal, and your reputation solidifies around this demonstrated capacity. Machiavelli understood that one dramatic action must be followed by consistent execution over time. Here's what the realistic timeline looks like for permanent change in how people treat you. Week 1 and 2 represent the testing phase. Some people will test harder immediately after your initial enforcement, what psychologists call an extinction burst. They're used to getting certain responses from you, and your change disrupts that pattern. They increase pressure to see if they can return things to the previous equilibrium. Others will probe more subtly to determine whether your enforcement was situational or consistent. They'll create slightly different versions of the same boundary violation to see if your standard holds across contexts. The majority are simply observing, taking in new data about who you are. Your task during weeks 1 and 2 is maintaining the exact same standard you demonstrated initially. No apologizing, no softening, no extensive explanations. Brief and consistent enforcement teaches people that, yes, this is real, and no, it's not changing back. Weeks 3 and 4 bring recalibration. Testing typically decreases because people have gathered enough data to understand your new operating system. New patterns emerge in your relationships. Some people interact with you less frequently because they preferred the previous dynamic. Others interact with you more respectfully because they've adjusted to your standards. You might notice certain relationships ending during this phase. People who were in your life primarily because you were accommodating or useful start drifting away when you're no longer as flexible. This feels uncomfortable, yet it's the filter working as designed. Relationships built on you suppressing your needs aren't relationships worth maintaining. Your task during weeks 3 and 4 is noticing who adapted versus who left without chasing those who left or punishing those who tested you. The people who matter will have adjusted. Those who couldn't or wouldn't adjust have removed themselves. Both outcomes serve you. Months 2 and 3 establish new equilibrium. Your boundary has become a known fact about how you operate. Tests become rare because people have accepted this is simply who you are. Your reputation has updated in the minds of everyone who witnessed the change or heard about it from others. This is where power dynamics shift meaningfully. People approach you differently in new situations because they're operating from your established reputation rather than testing to discover your limits. The effort you invested in those first few weeks of consistency pays compounding returns as your reputation precedes you. Your task during months 2 and 3 is maintaining your standard without thinking about it consciously. It should feel natural now, rather than requiring constant vigilance. Apply the same principle to new situations as they arise, building on the foundation you've established. Beyond month 3, you're operating from a fundamentally different social position. The Machiavelli aura that people perceive comes from knowing you mean what you say, and you'll calmly enforce it. This isn't something you assert verbally. This is something they've learned through experience and observation. Machiavelli understood that reputation works geometrically rather than linearly. One action witnessed by 5 people gets discussed with 15 others who mention it to 45 more. Your reputation spreads beyond anyone you've directly interacted with. Here's how this plays out practically. You enforce a boundary with someone in a meeting attended by 6 other people. Those 6 people witnessed your enforcement directly. They now know something concrete about how you operate under pressure. This changes how they approach you in future interactions. Those 6 people also tell others about what they witnessed. You know what happened in the meeting yesterday becomes a story that spreads through your professional or social network. The story might be accurate or might be embellished, yet either version communicates that you enforce boundaries clearly. Now someone you've never met hears this story before meeting you for the first time. They approach you already knowing or believing they know that you're someone who maintains standards. They don't test boundaries the way they might with someone whose reputation is unknown. Your enforcement with one person has shaped your interaction with someone you haven't met yet. This is why Machiavelli wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. Most people interact with the reputation version of you, rather than discovering through direct experience what you're like under pressure. Once your reputation establishes you as someone with clear boundaries and calm enforcement, most people never need to test it themselves. The compounding effect over years becomes significant. Year 1, you demonstrate capacity through decisive action and consistent follow-through. Your immediate circle recalibrates. Year 2 and 3, your reputation spreads to people who know of you before knowing you. Testing decreases overall because your standards are assumed rather than discovered. Year 5 and beyond, you're operating from an established position where your boundaries precede you. New people you meet often approach you already having heard you're someone who commands respect naturally. When you do show flexibility or accommodate someone, they value it more because they know it's a choice rather than a default pattern. This is silent power in its mature form. You're no longer proving anything because you proved it years ago. You're simply maintaining standards that everyone around you has learned to work with. The effort you invested in that initial decisive action and the months of consistent follow-through pays returns indefinitely. Machiavelli was a sophisticated strategic thinker, which means he taught discernment about when principles apply and when they require modification. Here's where rigid enforcement of boundaries would be strategically foolish. First, avoid this approach with those who hold legitimate power over you when you're not prepared to leave. Machiavelli wrote that you should not offend a prince unless you can destroy him. The modern translation is, don't enforce rigid boundaries with your boss unless you're ready to find a new job. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or abandoning all standards. This means your boundary enforcement with power holders needs to be more subtle and strategic. You might decline additional work by highlighting competing priorities the boss cares about, rather than simply saying no. You might redirect inappropriate behavior through questions rather than direct confrontation. You're maintaining standards through fox cunning rather than lion force. Second, intimate relationships operate on different rules than political or professional relationships. Machiavelli wrote The Prince about governance and power, not about marriage or close friendship. Romantic partnerships and deep friendships require mutual vulnerability that's incompatible with the strategic distance Machiavelli recommended for political relationships. You still need boundaries in intimate relationships, yet the enforcement looks different. You're explaining impact and seeking mutual understanding, rather than simply implementing consequences. You're building together, rather than establishing hierarchy. The person who applies pure Machiavelli philosophy to their marriage will likely end up divorced, which isn't strategic. Third, when you're genuinely wrong, admitting error demonstrates strength rather than weakness. Machiavelli never advocated doubling down on mistakes. In fact, he counseled adapting strategy when circumstances reveal your approach isn't working. The person who can't admit fault and adjust loses credibility faster than someone who never enforces boundaries at all. Fourth, with those significantly more vulnerable than you, power dynamics require different handling. Children subordinates who report to you. People in crisis all require firmness combined with care rather than pure enforcement. Machiavelli despised unnecessary cruelty and recognized that harsh treatment of the weak typically backfires by creating resentment without achieving objectives. The sophisticated application of Machiavelli philosophy involves visible switching between lion and fox responses based on strategic assessment. Most situations don't require the lion. The fox handles them more effectively. Yet when the lion becomes necessary, it must be unmistakable. Here's a fox moment. Someone violates a minor boundary for the first time, and they're generally respectful in your interactions. Maybe they're a few minutes late to a casual meeting, or they forget something you mentioned once. The fox response involves noting it internally without reacting immediately. You give them room to self-correct. If it becomes a pattern, then you address it. If it remains isolated, you let it go. Why use the fox here? You're conserving social capital for situations that actually matter. You're demonstrating proportionality, showing you can distinguish between accidents and patterns. You're proving you're reasonable rather than rigid, which makes your lion moments more credible when they arrive. Here's a lion moment. Someone repeatedly violates a boundary you've stated clearly, or they commit a single major transgression that crosses a line you've established as non-negotiable. The lion response is immediate, clear, and final. No warning if this is part of an established pattern. Public if the violation was public. Decisive in a way that ends ambiguity. Why use the lion here? You're demonstrating that you track patterns and you have hierarchy in what matters to you. You're showing that some things are non-negotiable, which makes your flexibility on other things feel like choice rather than weakness. You're ending a question definitively rather than leaving it open for continued testing. The mastery is in the visible contrast. You're usually collaborative, flexible, and reasonable. This makes the rare moments of unmovable firmness more impactful. People learn that when you shift into enforcement mode, it's because something genuinely matters to you, rather than because you're generally difficult or controlling. This is what creates the perception of emotional control. You're clearly capable of strong emotion, yet you choose when to express it based on strategic assessment rather than reactive impulse. People who can make this choice reliably are rare enough that it becomes a defining characteristic. Machiavelli wrote in chapter 25 of The Prince about fortune being like a rushing river that floods the plains when turbulent. His advice was to build banks and dams during calm times so the river could be managed when it rose. The modern application is maintaining your standards through small daily actions so you're prepared when major challenges arrive. Small boundaries maintained daily build your capacity for large boundaries when necessary. Saying no to minor impositions that don't align with your priorities trains the muscle you'll need when someone asks for major accommodations. Addressing small disrespects calmly teaches you how to address major violations without losing emotional control. Your reputation functions as infrastructure in Machiavelli's framework. The reputation you build through one decisive action becomes the foundation for future interactions. Maintaining that reputation requires consistency rather than repeated dramatic displays. People already know your standards, so you're just operating within them rather than re-establishing them constantly. Strategic visibility matters here. Some boundary enforcement benefits from being public because it reinforces reputation. Other enforcement works better privately because it preserves relationships while maintaining standards. The question is whether others knowing about your enforcement serves your strategic interests or just creates unnecessary friction. Adaptation to circumstances represents Machiavelli's core teaching about flexibility in tactics while maintaining firm principles. Your boundary around protecting focused work time might look different in a crisis than during normal operations. You're not abandoning the boundary, you're adapting its application to reality. The principle stays constant while the tactics flex. Machiavelli wrote in chapter 18 that a prince need not have all the good qualities, but he should certainly appear to have them. The sophisticated reading here isn't about deception. It's about strategic emphasis. You possess multiple qualities. You have capacity for both strength and compassion, for both firmness and flexibility, for both enforcement and forgiveness. The question becomes which qualities you emphasize to shape how others perceive and interact with you. Most people emphasize their accommodating qualities by default. They demonstrate flexibility and kindness and willingness to help. These are genuinely good qualities, yet when they're the only qualities others experience, they create a dynamic where boundaries are assumed to be soft and standards are assumed to be negotiable. The strategic approach involves emphasizing your capacity for enforcement and clarity first. You demonstrate through decisive action that you maintain standards and enforce boundaries calmly. This establishes your reputation as someone who operates from principle. Then you demonstrate compassion and flexibility within that established framework. The result is completely different from leading with accommodation. When people know you're capable of firm enforcement, your kindness is received as generosity rather than weakness. When people understand your boundaries are real, your flexibility is valued as a gift rather than expected as a default. When people have experienced your strength, your vulnerability is seen as courage rather than neediness. This sequence matters enormously. Establish respect through demonstrated capacity, then build affection through chosen generosity. The reverse sequence, seeking affection first and hoping respect will follow, typically fails because people learn to take your generosity for granted without developing respect for your boundaries. Machiavelli never said, "Be cruel." He said it's much safer to be feared than loved, when one of the two must be lacking. He also said a prince should inspire fear in such a way that if he does not win love, he avoids hatred. The synthesis is demonstrating strength that creates respect, then adding kindness that creates affection, producing relationships where you're both respected and liked rather than used and resented. The caricature of Machiavelli as cynical and amoral misses what he actually thought about human nature and power. He was a Republican who believed in civic virtue and public service. He wrote The Prince during exile, watching lesser men succeed through understanding reality, while better men failed through idealism. His actual message comes through clearly in his writings. The world doesn't reward good intentions. It rewards effective action aligned with how things actually work. Wishing people were more fair, or more reasonable, or more respectful doesn't change their behavior. Demonstrating through action that certain boundaries are real does change their behavior. He also wrote that where the willingness is great, the difficulties cannot be great. Once you decide clearly on your standards and commit to maintaining them, the execution becomes simpler than you imagine. The difficulty lives in the ambivalence in wanting to maintain boundaries while also wanting everyone to like you, in hoping you can avoid the discomfort of enforcement. Machiavelli would say the discomfort of enforcement is temporary, while the benefits of established boundaries are permanent. The testing period lasts weeks. The respect you gain lasts years. The people who leave were using you anyway. The people who stay treat you better than they did before. Find the moment where you need to demonstrate necessita. There's a boundary that matters to your principles. There's a test you've been avoiding. There's a line you know you need to hold, but you've been hoping you wouldn't have to. State it clearly, enforce it calmly, accept whatever consequences come, maintain it consistently. One action, changed calculation, different treatment. Here's the honest promise. Some people won't like it. Some will resist before adjusting. Some will test harder initially. Yet those who matter will respect it. The adapters will recalibrate. The observers will note it. Your future interactions will reflect it. More importantly, you'll respect yourself. Your actions will align with your principles. Your words will be backed by behavior. Your life will feel more like it belongs to you, rather than being shaped by others' expectations. 6 months from watching this, you'll know whether you applied it. They'll treat you differently. You won't need to wonder whether people respect you, because the evidence will be obvious in how they approach you, how they speak to you, how they respond when you set a boundary. Machiavelli spent years watching people navigate power and writing about patterns that persist across centuries. The pattern he identified most clearly is that demonstrated capacity changes everything. Show people through one decisive action that you understand necessita, that you operate from principle rather than impulse, that you enforce standards calmly and consistently. The world will adjust to you rather than you constantly adjusting to the world. That's the Florentine truth. That's Machiavelli philosophy applied. That's the one thing that changes how people treat you permanently. Now you know what Machiavelli knew. The question is whether you'll act on it.